Prosecution may give its rebuttal.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the people of the state of Colorado, in particular people of Weld County. I thank you for your time and your attention, your dedication that I know you'll show during your deliberations. Counsel just said, don't get lost in the details. Look at the big picture in deciding guilt. Well, if you want to look at the big picture, there's the big picture, ladies and gentlemen. Sitting right there at the defense table. Shawna Nelson's the big picture. Shawna Nelson committed this murder and the evidence proves it. I want to talk about a couple things. I'm going to go quick because I don't have a lot of time with you here today. But counsel started off his closing argument by saying, well, we know how Shawna would have acted because they broke up once before. But there's one big difference, ladies and gentlemen. That difference is named Christian. When they broke up the first time, there wasn't a baby involved. They got back together on July 4th, and what happened? Shawna got pregnant that night that they got back together, she said. They had an abortion the first time. That didn't get egg. So I'll get him this time. I'll get pregnant again, and I'll keep the baby. Then I'll get him away from Heather. That's the big difference you need to keep in mind when you're looking at the difference in the two breakups, ladies and gentlemen. A couple other things the defense brought up that I wanted to touch base on. They say they want to blame this on Greeley PD. Okay? Rush to judgment. Okay? Well, the people who saw Heather Garris have to get on her knees and get her brains blown out, they said right off the bat, it was Shawna Nelson. It wasn't Greeley PD who jumped to that conclusion. It was the people who knew her and knew what was going on there, and they too said it was Shawna Nelson. The investigation goes where the evidence leads, and the evidence leads right there. Had they not done this, what would the argument been? Oh, well, they say it took them a long time to even focus in on the suspect. The evidence couldn't be very clear because, boy, it took them a long time. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. They talk about the phone calls on January 22nd. Shawna never called. Shawna never called Heather Garris's direct extension. And again, this, according to the defendant, she was calling to try and get a closing statement. Well, they give you your closing statement when you close your account. And you saw the video of it. They gave her the paperwork, and she walked out with it. But look at the phone calls on the timeline. She talked to somebody. One of the calls there was 46 seconds. Did somebody tell her Heather wasn't there on the 22nd? We don't know. But I don't have to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. Mr. Lamons went through the elements. That's what needs to be proven. And we submit to you there's only one of those elements that is really an issue. And that's did the defendant do this? Counsel talked about, during the interview, the defendant had no fear of testing when Detective Tharp said, hey, you know, we're going to test your clothes. She said, okay. Well, why? Because she knew she'd been wearing a gown from up here to down here, and she had already thrown it away. She knew she'd gotten rid of the black gloves. She thought she'd gotten rid of the shoes. She didn't think they had anything on her. And she played the part. Counsel said that this is tragic. Well, I agree this is tragic, ladies and gentlemen. But what was the defendant's reaction when she was told of this tragedy by Detective Tharp? Do you know who the victim is? No. It's Heather. What wasn't there? I didn't do it. Oh my God, Ig's wife got murdered? Oh, I know. Oh, no, I didn't do it. I swear I didn't do it. Was there any of that? No. It's Heather. Ladies and gentlemen, the defense has posited to you that this case is about greed. Perhaps. You didn't give me a loan. I agree. This case is about greed. But it's not about monetary greed. This case has nothing to do with money. You can earn money, you can steal money. This case is about greed, but it's not about money. Heather Garris had something that the defendant wanted. The defendant wanted something that Heather Garris possessed. Heather Garris had something that was so important to her that she was willing to kill to get it. At least kill the person who was standing in her way. And the thing that Heather Garris had that was so important to the defendant, more important than life itself, was something that you and I, ladies and gentlemen, may think was worthless. And that's Ignacio Garris. That's what Heather Garris had. That's what the defendant wanted, to the point that she was willing to go to the credit union in a Grim Reaper mask and shoot Heather Garris. You're going to have to decide what testimony to believe. You can believe the defendant, or you can believe the rest of the evidence, ladies and gentlemen, because they're diametrically opposed. Let's talk about Michelle Moore. If you want to believe the defendant's version of the events, then you have to believe that you have to believe that the defendant is the best lesbian lover that's ever walked this earth. Because if you want to believe the defendant, Michelle Moore made up her whole testimony here in front of you because the defendant no longer wanted to be her lesbian lover. If you want to believe the defendant, Michelle Moore made this story up, implicated herself in an attempted murder on the 22nd of January 2007, simply because the defendant no longer wanted to be her lesbian lover. And if you want to believe the defendant, then you have to believe that Michelle Moore is facing 9 years in prison simply because the defendant no longer wanted to be her lesbian lover. Well, you get to decide whether or not you want to believe Michelle Moore or you want to believe the defendant, ladies and gentlemen. But even if you choose not to believe Michelle Moore, look at the physical evidence. It's overwhelming in this case, ladies and gentlemen. Let's look at the DNA. The DNA on both shoes match the defendant. The same type of shoes that Brad Mitchell saw the murderer wear. According to Agent Woods, it was the defendant's DNA, not Michelle Moore's, the defendant's DNA. It was on both shoes. What are the odds that somebody who wanted to frame the defendant and place DNA from the defendant on some article of clothing would have chosen shoes? Okay? What are the odds of that? Of all the stuff they could have done, I think I'll plant the DNA on shoes. Okay? And then what are the odds that the defendant, coincidentally, would decide to say, I'm going to go to the liquor store and I'm not going to wear shoes? And then what are the odds that the person who was going to frame the defendant, who wouldn't have known that she was going to go to the store without shoes, would dump the shoes 700 feet away from where the defendant got stopped? What are the odds? There was female DNA on the shell casings. There was female DNA in the mask. The defendant's DNA, not Michelle Moore's DNA, ladies and gentlemen. The same mask, the same type of mask that Brad Mitchell said was one of those masks you can see out, but they can't see in. That's the mask the defendant had in her truck. And counsel says, yeah, but there was no DNA. There was no DNA from Heather Garris on the defendant. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know. I'm sure some of you cook. Why do you wear an apron? So you don't get stuff on your clothes, right? What was she doing? She was wearing a full gown. And they say, well, there wasn't anything on the mask. Well, of course it wasn't anything.